11. Now, this is talking about Lazarus and Mary and Martha. Now, who's familiar with that story? We all kind of are, right? But I don't want that to change how we need to view things afresh. When I go to the scripture, even though it's a story I've gone over before, I want to make sure that I see things fresh. Because these are real people dealing with real problems. Who in here is real people dealing with real problems? There you go. Everybody should raise their hand. So when we look at how Jesus handles this situation, and it's a dire situation, we need to look at the people around us. I want you to do that just for 1 second. I want you to look at everybody around you. Okay? These are the people that God wants you to minister to. Okay? But they're also the people that's going to minister to you. I don't want us to forget that. Because God's put us all here for a reason. There's no accidents with God. Okay? And sometimes when we go through life and go through situations, it may not seem like God is there. But I assure you He is. So let's look at it for a second. And I want you to look at it with fresh eyes. And I want you to look at it with them in mind and their real problem that they're dealing with. Have you ever had someone close to you pass away? I know there's a couple in here that had friends recently pass away. We did. And we asked why. Have you ever asked that question? Just me? Yeah, we all have, right? We had a friend of ours that passed away at 40 of cancer. Very good friend of ours. And it was difficult. It was not easy. But one thing I didn't anticipate was my best friend's dad had an issue that he was dealing with. And he wanted to go on a car ride during the funeral and all that kind of stuff. He, a couple of years before, had dealt with an aneurysm and several other health problems. And God answered their prayer, and they were gone. It was really and truly a miracle. The doctor said, I don't know how in the world this is gone, but it's gone. And so when his daughter-in-law passes away of cancer at 40, he didn't know how to deal with that. He's like, why, God? She had all of her life ahead of her. 3 children, a husband that loved her. And yet I'm still here. My life is over. Essentially, he's kind of late in the game, but that's the way he viewed it. And he asked me, he's like, and he's a pastor himself. Pastored for several years. And he had those questions. Why me? Why her? And so we deal with those kind of questions. But what I want to do is look freshly at how God deals with those things. So let's read John chapter 11, the first 16 verses. And I'll go ahead and read it because I know this is a lot of material. He says, now a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair, and it was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So we know this lady, right? We had seen her in an early story where she's washing Jesus' feet. Verse 4, when Jesus heard it, he said, this sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to the disciples, let's go to Judea again. Verse 8, Rabbi, the disciples told him, just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going there again? Aren't there 12 hours in a day? Jesus answered. If anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks during the night, he does stumble because the light is not in him. He said this, and then he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. Then the disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well. Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let's go to him. Then Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too so we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he had found Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. That's verse 17. So, who are we dealing with here? Mary, right? We had seen Mary earlier in another story. Who else are we dealing with? Who? The disciples? Okay. Jesus? Right? So what are their reactions? They've got some different reactions going on here, don't they? So these sisters sent a message to Jesus and said, Lord, the one you love is sick. Does Jesus care about them? They were confident enough to send him word. I mean, this is Jesus here. There were crowds always following him. But yet they are so close. They feel so close to him that they could just send him a note to say, hey, the one you love is sick. And when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness will not end in death, but it's for the glory of God. Now, this is kind of different, right? It's kind of scratching the head kind of thing. I wrote that down on page 2 there. What kind of ways is he reacting here? He says, first, the sickness won't end in death. Later, we find out Lazarus is dead. But then he decides to wait. Now, how do you feel about that? If you're dealing with an immediate issue, let's put it on ourselves for a minute. If you're dealing with an immediate issue, you send Jesus a message. How would you feel if he waited? Especially if it seemed this dire. Now, come on now. You're going to have to get active with me. Right. Who's ever responded to Jesus that way in their situation in life? Speak up. We all have, right? Why are you not taking care of this right now? I've got a text before. Somebody asked me that very question. I'm in God's word. I'm seeking his face. Why is he not reacting to what I have to? Why is he not there? Why does it seem he's not there? Because really, locally, he wasn't there in their situation. Sometimes he does that for his purpose, not ours. His timing, not our timing. But how do you feel about that, though? God, I can tell you that all day long. It's all in God's timing. But does that make you feel any better? Why do you think that is? We are. We are pretty impatient. We want it now. We live in a push-button society today, don't we? Where we can get anything we want, everything that we want, right now, and most of the time it's on my phone. That's how we react today. But that's not much different than what they were dealing with. Now, they had the confidence that Jesus would take care of the problem. They went straight to Jesus, who they needed to go to. Right? They went to the one who they knew it could take care of the problem. That was the right answer. But they didn't get the answer they thought they were going to get. So let's look at that for a second. How did the disciples react? He says, okay, we got to go over here. What did they say? What's their knee-jerk reaction? Right. What are you talking about? We're not going over there because they already tried to kill you. What are you doing? So they weren't seeing, even though they were with Jesus, they weren't seeing it from his perspective. Can you and I see things from Jesus' perspective? So when we don't get the answer we think we need to get, my perspective is limited, isn't it? We have to keep that in mind. So he says, just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going to go there again? Big question mark. Then he says, aren't there 12 hours in a day? Jesus answered, if anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks during the night, he does stumble because the light is not in him. What's that mean? What's he talking about? John, you got something? That's kind of a confusing answer, isn't it? Come on now, you got to speak up. Yeah, you do have to trust him. Absolutely. Faith? Absolutely. So there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of trusting, a lot of faith got to go on. And it's looking from their perspective. Again, we're limited based on the way we see things. He said this, and he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. What's their response? If he's asleep, he'll get better. I think they missed the point, didn't they? He's like, well, he's going to get better. It's fine. We don't have to go. We don't have to go. He'll be all right. But what does Jesus have to... Go ahead, John.
I think it's similar to when Jesus talks about the cares of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Being tossed about and waiting. Right? So if we're seeking him, if we're grounded in him, if he's our cornerstone, if he's our bedrock, it's the same as being in the light. It's similar.
Yep.
It's a very similar passage. If he's not, then we will respond the same way the world responds in this situation. And then, unfortunately, like Martha and Mary, we don't want her.
Yes. That's a good point.
We don't want her. We don't want to go through trials. We don't want to go through tribulations. We don't want to go through sickness. But we have to, and we have to know that he is working it out for good because he's done somehow be glorified in it. We just have to be patient and watch and see.
There you go.
But we must.
That's it.
There's also a side that, and maybe more so for women than men,
Mm-hmm.
and that is where you tend to take on the responsibility of, I've got to fix that problem. I've got to take care of that ailment or that sick person, and I've got to nurse them back to health. And that was the woman's responsibility to do that more so.
Okay.
So if she saw a way to get help for them, there was an immediate need for them to come in because they had faith that he could heal him.
Right.
And they believed he could do it.
That's true. So they had faith, didn't they? They did. They had faith that he could do it. So, talking about the disciples, though,
They knew he could do it, but they wanted it on their terms.
there you go. That's where I was going. See, they knew he could do it. But it's always, see, we can have faith in Jesus, right? But we have term limits. We have our terms. Right? We have our terms. We want Jesus to do things the way we think he should do them. Now, Mary and Martha were dealing with the same way. But also the disciples we're talking about it in the same vein as well. Well, he's going to be fine. But then he has to clarify. Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there, that you may believe, but let's go to him. Basically, I know what's going on. He's died. Let's go. We got to go. So then Thomas comes in. And he says to his fellow disciples, let's go too so that we may die with him. Now, what's Thomas talking about? Is he talking about Lazarus? Is he talking about Jesus? What's that? Exactly. So he's talking about their situation. His focus is not on Lazarus. His focus is on Jesus and their situation. Right? Now, Thomas sometimes gets a bad rap. All right, so let's think about this for a second. So if you put yourself in Thomas's shoes, this is a logical deduction, is it not? It's a logical deduction. Okay, so if they tried to kill him before, and he wants to go, let's just go ahead and hang it up. We might as well go and die too. We've committed to this, right? They're committed. Thomas is committed. So, like I said, he gets a bad rap. He gets that Doubting Thomas name. The nickname's unfair, though. He should be called Logical Thomas. On page 3 there, I said, it's not illogical to think that they might die with Jesus if they go up to Judea. Later on, Jesus will die there, and 11 of the 12 disciples will die because of their faith in him. Thomas isn't crazy. He's logical. The problem is that our logic does not take into account the power and plan of God. Human reasoning fails when we don't consider the divine. So like Thomas, we're tempted to believe only when we can figure it all out. Now, does that bother you if you cannot figure it out? I see a lot of shaking heads. And I think about my wife in this avenue, because we can't go to a magician show because it drives her up the wall because she can't figure out how the guy did it. Okay? And I'm like, just enjoy it. It's fine. I know there's something going on behind the scenes that I don't understand. I'm okay with it. She is not. So she's sitting there next to me she's like, okay, I want to see how he did that. How did you do that? I'm like, just watch the show. I'm like, I don't care how he did it. It's cool looking. You know, the man is talented. But you got to have it to where you know everything behind the scenes. Right? Yeah, you shake your head back there. Don't speak up. It drives her bananas. She does. She'd much rather get up and go. But does it drive you bananas when God's working behind the scenes and you don't know what he's doing? Because understand something, nothing happens by chance. Nothing is without purpose. Whether it be sorrow, sickness, or death, nothing happens to you that God does not permit for a reason. Are you okay with that? You're going to encounter situations in your life, but God can be glorified through all of it. If you're going through a situation right now, and it seems rough and tough, and you don't know what's going on, understand God's in it, and he can be glorified through it. Right? Do you feel that way? Christian maturity is learning to look at a situation and knowing that whatever you face it so God can be glorified through you. Like John said earlier, we're going to go through this stuff. We don't want to hurt. We don't want to go through these situations. We don't want loved ones to pass away unexpectedly. But God's going to be glorified. And we may not understand why or how at the time. Like I was talking about my friend earlier. He came to visit us and the kids came with him, and we were sitting there talking with him. And like I said, he's a pastor at a church. He's been in the ministry for, 25 years. Okay? And he was dealing with grief. But he said, you know what? Her relationship to Christ put mine to shame. He said, do you know how much now experiencing this, how much I can minister to those people who are dealing with something to say? He said, I've done ministry for close to 30 years, but now I can more effectively do it, knowing the hurt that they're going through, experiencing the hurt that they're going through. He said, I've got unbelievable amounts to preach now because I've experienced this. And he said, it hurts right now, man. He said, but God will get the glory. And her funeral was one of the most glorified of Jesus I have ever been to. People were coming out of the woodwork to say how much that woman impacted their life. And I pray that my relationship will be as close to Christ as hers was, even at 40. And I think we all need to. Okay, let's look at the next section, 17 through 37. Let's see, went too far. So, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again, Jesus told her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him, I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. Let me just stop right there for a second. Do we see Mary's faith? She's got faith in the right place, don't she? She also has good theology in place. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So she knows resurrection is true. She believes Jesus when he says that he's the resurrection. But I think she's missing something. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. So let me ask you something. How does that statement impact your life? I am the resurrection and the life. What's something he didn't say? He doesn't say, I can resurrect people and I have life. He says, I am the resurrection. I am the life. Our hope is not an event. Mary's kind of looking at it at the event stage. The resurrection at the end of time, right? The last days. Our hope is not in that event. Our hope is in the one who can bring to life. See, he is life. This is just one of the ways that Jesus is different. You look at all these other religious figures out there and all that kind of stuff. He's the one that claims to be the life. Not contain life. He is life. He is the resurrection. You have a life, but he is complete life. You can lose your life. He can't lose his. He laid it down for you and me, but he will never lose his life. His resurrection was the proof that death could not hold him down. It's not an event, really, but it's who he is. So let's read. Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher's here and he's calling for you." As soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews were with her in the house, consoling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now that's something their sister already said, right? So they're both thinking the same thing. If you had just been here, then he wouldn't have died at all. That was their plan. They wanted to get the note to him so he'll show up in time so that way their brother wouldn't have to die, because they had faith that he would heal him. Not a bad thing. Do we have good intention plans? We have good intention plans, don't we? Every day I get up, I got a plan, right? Who's a planner in here? Yeah, I see some planners in there. Yeah. We got a plan. What happens when that plan goes awry? Do we get bent out of shape about it? Some of us do. If everything doesn't go according to what I just laid out, it throws a kink in the rest of my day, right? That was their plan. What was his plan? So when Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. What does that statement say to you in 33? What does that say to you about Jesus? He's compassionate. He is. These were good friends of his. But he knows the situation. He's working it behind the scenes. Why did he get upset? Why did he feel deeply troubled? He knows what's going on. Bingo. He hurts when we hurt. Now, I had y'all look at each other a while ago. We're to treat ourselves the same way. Jackie, if you're hurting, I'm hurting. John, if you're hurting, I'm hurting. If you're hurting, Allison, I'm hurting. Henry, if you're hurting, I'm hurting. I want you to understand that. See, one of the biggest things behind what I'm trying to get through with this disciple life is the fact that it's relational. That we're to pour our lives into that person next to you. That person in the back pew. This person in the front pew. I'm to pour my life into you because I love you enough to do that. These people in here around you, you got to love them. Because what did Jesus say? How is the world going to know who we are in him? Love one another, right? Do we just say it or do we do it? I can say it all day long, But until you're going through a situation like they're going through, and I show up and I pray with you and I love on you and my wife does and my kids do, that's when you feel it. Right? That is when you feel it. And that's what Jesus was doing here. He was deeply troubled. And that's what I want to happen. That's the main point of this disciple life stuff, is the relationships that we build with one another. Jerry and I were talking about it earlier. Can you just tell them what you were telling me earlier about your group?
I was thinking the biggest thing we got out of it is the closeness we develop with each other, the concern we got with each other. And we could have not shared one verse of Scripture, but we just love each other. It's like you said, when one of our brothers hurt, we hurt. And we shared that. And we were open and shared. I have a bunch of younger guys in our group. I was just amazed at how open they were to share and how they loved each other. And we loved each other. And it just, by the time at the end of we were sad to see our time.
Yep.
We liked seeing each other. And just sharing. And just loving each other. It's just a good time amongst friends that love each other.
Exactly. See, that's where the rubber meets the road here. I want y'all to be involved in groups, not for just the Bible study, because it's more than just a Bible study. It's pouring your life into somebody else. Now, it's hard to do like right now what we're doing here, because we kind of had to combine. And normally we have guys groups and ladies groups, and there's stuff that ladies can share with one another that they won't share if they're guys sitting right next to them, right? And likewise, if the guy's like, I ain't going to say in front of my wife, you know. Even though we're so close and we do share things together, there's a lot of things that women understand better that guys have no clue about. Can I get an amen on that? Hey, I was going to say, yeah, you better speak up. But it's something that, you know, we can pour into each other. And that's the whole point behind all this. It's not simply another Bible study. It's building relationships. And if you look back at that logo just for a second on the front of your book, it's intentional, relational, and it's authentic. Okay? We got to be intentional about loving one another. And it's obviously relational. Jerry, you care for those guys, right? If they called you at 3 a.m., what are you going to do? You're going to go. And it's got to be authentic. So many people today are getting marketed to, especially the younger generation. They are hungering so much for authenticity. Somebody to be real with me. And in that loving relationship with one another, you can be real. You can be more real than you ever have been in church, in a Sunday school class. Even though we need to have some of that going on in our Sunday school too. Because we love and care for each other there as well. But that's the whole point behind disciple life. It's getting to a point where you're working toward one another, pouring into one another, and loving like Jesus to one another. Because you see his compassion right here in this verse. That even though he knew what was going on, he was deeply troubled. And you'll see in just a second that, what's verse 35 say? Jesus wept. Now, how many people have that verse memorized? I know Candace's brother does. He told me one time, he's like, oh, I got that verse memorized. Jesus wept. I'm like, well, good for you. But he wept with them. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. So now what does that showcase to everybody else? How much Jesus loved Lazarus and those two sisters. That's what we want to show the world, right? They think we're a bunch of haters. But the thing about it is, we need to show them how much we love. Not accept what they're doing. Don't get me wrong, there is no compromise. However, they need to see our love and how much we care for them. To show them what Jesus is showing these guys here. All right, I got to be quick. But the last section here, Jesus' power over death. So after entering their grief, Jesus moves to end it. Why did Jesus let this happen if he knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead? Why did he let those he loved experience 4 days of grief? Jesus is doing things that we can never grasp. He's God. He has a purpose far beyond what we can even imagine. We don't know all the stuff that he's doing. But we should never doubt his love for us. His desire for us to experience his glory and his call for us to trust him. His love, his glory, and our need for faith are often most clear in the darkest of times. That's how you know where your faith is. If everything's going good, everything's going smooth, where do you think your faith is? A lot of people basically just don't even think twice about it, honestly. If their world's doing great. But what happens when a crisis hits? They get on their knees real quick, don't they? Mother's been in the hospital, in and out of the hospital for my entire life. I see that all the time. People come in, they finally like, well, I need to get closer to God during this time. And they do. But most of the time they say, I hadn't been to church, I hadn't been to Sunday school, I hadn't been to any of that in so long. When I'm sitting there talking to them in the waiting room. Because I'll ask them, where do you go to church at? Well, we hadn't been in a while. It's the love of fellow believers. In times of crisis. It's Jesus' love during times of crisis when you know where your faith really is. The miracle was about something bigger than removing their grief. The miracle was about the power of Jesus over death. And he wanted to showcase that to everybody there. You got all these folks there, right? Now, if he had went immediately and healed him, nobody would have been there. But he wanted to wait a significant amount of time to make sure that everybody knew this guy's dead. Okay? But not only that, to showcase the glory of God in his resurrection. To say, hey, I've got the power over this. And I am life. Nobody else can say that but me. That's what he wanted to showcase. The power of God. So few passages are filled with more hope than this one. Why is this filled with such hope? Because everything that he said, everything that he tells us, everything that we read is showcased right here. No occasion feels more hopeless than when someone you love dies. You feel like it's all over. There are no more chances. There's no more hope. Death is spoken. It's final. But he has the final word. That's why I titled it this way. In all things, Jesus, and only Jesus, has the final word on what's going to happen. Not you, not me. He's got the final word. And that final word is, I am the resurrection and the life. Any comments? Does that not make y'all feel good? Even in this dire situation, which we all go through, he's the resurrection and the life. He's got it under his control. And the power of death has absolutely no hold on him or you. Does that not make you feel, can I get an amen out of that? I mean, come on, this is God on display, right? How powerful is this message to the lost? That you don't have to die in your sins. He can free you from that and give you the resurrection for eternity. You can live with him forever. All right. Any comments, questions, all that kind of stuff? Anything? This is going to be a little bit different, like I said, with Disciple Life, everybody being together. It's the same.